Hi, good evening, Doctor. For this assignment, you asked us to do a video recording. Sorry if I look like a bum. It's been a long day at work. So for this assignment, you had us do an assignment, which is the test, which would break down my gender based on some of the personality traits I have. So this is used. We use the BEM sexual inventory, and the sexual inventory is used to measure different aspects of hypothetical or to hypothesize psychological traits. So basically, I went through this test and I just basically answered as honest as I could all the questions in regard to my personality. And the ratings were scaled from 1 to 7 with a mean of 4. So I actually found out that I was a lot more feminine than I thought I would be. My femininity rating was a 4.5. My masculinity rating was a 5.05. And for neutral items, I was a 4.8. So the interpretation that follows for that is that if both your femininity and masculinity are above 4, then you are androgynous. If both your femininity and masculinity score below 4, you are undifferentiated. And the neutral items, unfortunately, are interpreted further, which I don't really understand or even kind of like. So, yes, I guess I'm a little bit more androgynous than I thought I was. Maybe I'm a little bit more sensitive, I don't know. But they kind of brought up that question, though, is this a good measure for gender? And automatically I already kind of, I have a lot of different problems with this because, well, for one, I'm the one answering the question. I can't really see it through an outside perspective. I think if maybe my wife, my mother, or some of my best friends were able to answer it for me, maybe this would be a better answer to gender. But I don't. But another reason why, and this is the primary reason, is because how masculine or feminine a person can be is determined usually generally by the culture they belong to, and that of course has to do with stereotypes, and it really kind of depends on where you live. I mean, I'm from the Northwest region of the United States, so you don't see me driving around with a big truck, which is what they'd probably do, and maybe the South, which would probably be, I guess that's a stereotype, I shouldn't go into it, but it's a different aspect of what it would be. You'd probably see us in a Subaru out here more than anything. And like I said before, I'm biased in how I answer these questions. I'm always going to view myself in a better light than, say, some other people would. So like I said, it would be better if there was an outside source looking at this instead of myself. So it's not necessarily cultural specific in these questions, so you have to be cautious with this interpretation. I do believe that there is a value of this scale, but it would only be good for comparing gender spectrums across cultural lines. I mean, what constitutes being a male in America could definitely vary from what is going on in Asia, and maybe this could shine, some lights on the differences. So the next one we did, there was the gender test I took, the next test. But before I really reveal the results of what my gender test, I really want to discuss what the normal preconceived indicators of what a gender is. Do I think that being a gender should be straightforward? I'm not sure that's ever a straightforward thing in defining what a gender is, because likely a gender's definition is in the eye of the beholder, that is influenced by a society or a cultural norm. I mean, however, we can take a relatively scientific approach by looking at different categories of classification. So the biological categories, which it's almost fallacious to even look at, but they are kind of, in a lot of cultures, defining what a gender is. And the biological categories for gender influence our anatomy, and this is what makes up who you are, your bones, your organs. your hair, where you get it. Look at this gross beard coming in right now. I mean, that kind of indicates that I'm a male. I mean, this also means, anatomical, like, do you have a penis? Do you have a vagina? Do you have uh, absurd amounts of hair all over your back, which makes you a male, or breasts, which makes you a female, or maybe you need to stop eating so much food. Another category of influences on gender is physiology, and this is like the inner workings of your body. Especially noting the differences for like females and males is the hormone levels and their functions between the two different sexes. And other gender influences are our chromosomal makeup. This is pretty straightforward. Men have an X and a Y chromosome in each of their cells, and females have two X chromosomes. And scientists can look at a karyotype to see if the chromosome Y is presented, which is like a snapshots of the chromosomes in the cells. However, if a female has a complete androgen insensitivity syndrome, which is a resultant Y chromosome, which can result in undescended testes, but appears perfectly normal in female organs, uterus, or fallopian tubes, leading to a lack of menstruation, this could actually throw an entirely complete wrench into how we look at gender. So all of a sudden, before I even go into the other categories, this kind of just reveals that the body plays tricks on it, and the body isn't necessarily the greatest use for looking at how a gender is made up. But another influence of a gender outside of that, even though I kind of jumped the gun a little bit, is genetic makeup. I mean, because different genes do have been identified as to whether an embryo will be a male or a female. So that kind of goes above the chromosomal one, I guess. But the karyotype may reveal otherwise. Another one is gender identity. This is not necessarily a physiological or an anatomical indicator, but this is more of how a person perceives themselves as what gender they belong to. Let's just say, like, Caitlyn Jenner, or for Bruce Jenner, always thought that they were a female, so they really had more of a gender identifier as to what they consider themselves to be. Another indicator is gender role behavior, and this is how men and women and their culture accepts their patterns of behavior. So, and this could actually go along with gender identity if you really wanted to stretch this one, because how you behave can really shine light on what you perceive yourself to be, or how everybody else perceives you to be. So when I took this test, and I got it right after a time or two, and it was revealed that the athlete in question had complete androgen insensitivity syndrome, which is a resultant Y chromosome, which can result in undescended testes, but normal appearance of female organs, but no ovaries, uterus, or fallopian tubes, which leads to a with lack of menstruation. So this was a little bit of a physiological gender bender, because this is absolutely a female, but the body didn't develop in the same way. So you could say that there is male and female characteristics, but maybe a gender identity throughout life pictured this person to being more of a female. It's really crazy, because it really lends itself into the next question. Was this an important to measure? Was this I'm sorry. This kind of leads to the next question. When is it important to measure gender? Well, for the most part, the athlete that we saw still had a lot of the musculature of a woman. So I classified her as an absolute woman without even thinking twice about it once I found out about CAIS. But it also makes you realize, is it important to measure gender? And I believe it is important to measure gender, especially like when you come to terms with identifying gender outside of gender identity. But it's important to measure gender on a level that doesn't have to do with identity, and I really got to emphasize that, is when safety is actually at question. Because I do believe that people should have their gender identity respected. But at the same point, we have to make sure that the person's well-being is kept intact. So this has nothing to do with the bathroom debate. I think anybody should use the bathroom, no matter which one they do, as long as it's their gender level. That's what they feel is. But now we're talking about safety, though. So if a woman identifies as a man but has more physiological differences that lead her to be a woman, I don't necessarily think that they should have to be allowed to play like football or something like that, because a woman typically has a 40% less muscle mass than a man. And this is just biology right here. So I think it's okay to gender identify in this case, because the person could get hurt badly. I do want to see political correctness, but I also don't want to see this person hurt if they line up as an offensive lineman against a defensive lineman who has more of a muscle mass. I think also gender measuring for safety purposes is also fine in prison, because we wouldn't want to see someone who is transgender be exploited. Just because they have a male sex, just because they have female sex organs, but they identify as a male, doesn't mean that the vagina would disappear, and there's a chance that that person could get raped, and we don't want to see that. And also, this could also apply to the medical field, where, yes, the person, maybe, let's say they were a male who identified as a female, but that doesn't change the fact that maybe they could have testicular cancer. So it's all about safety. And the question that came next was, can you think of a single test or examination that can unambiguously identify a person's gender? I don't see a single test that could determine a gender, because there's physiological, but there's also more cultural things that apply to what a person's gender is. And if somebody were to actually think that, I need to ask them the following questions, and these questions I came up with. What culture would be general? Specifically, would specific gender tests be applied to? Because different cultures around the world have different standards and expectations for what gender is. So I think if a gender test were to be built around all the social constructs of what it means to be male or female, the test would have to be strongly geared to whatever culture that came from. The next question I would ask that person who thinks that there would be a single gender identification question is, is the test based on a physiological or a chromosomal makeup? Does it factor in the complete androgen syndrome, potentially skewing the results? I guess I would also question if the person was using a test that potentially factored both these types that I've stated, because they're different. Biologically, like I was talking about with the androgen syndrome, nature screws with what we have, what we believe to be a certain type of gender identifier. And also, so the final question that I was asked, though, is what happens if these various different types of tests for determining gender disagree with each other? And I think that if various types of tests disagree with each other, then maybe the tests weren't worth doing in the first place. Because different test results can possibly mean that the typical definition of what gender is could be skewed from the get-go. Maybe the point we should probably trust the At this point, we should just trust the identity given by the person actually taking the test. They're the person who knows themselves the best. And it's possible that we need to just start accepting that gender is elusive in our society, and it should be defined by the individual and not by the constructs forced to us by society. Well, I thought this presentation would go a lot shorter, but hey, that's great. I'm sorry if I rambled on or repeated it. A little bit tired, but thank you, Doctor.